right, welcome everybody. Happy Wednesday, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are joining us from in the world. We are so happy to have you here with us today. My name's Meg. I'm part of Power to Fly's virtual hosting team, and I am really excited for today's event with Facebook. But before we get started, I just want to go over some really quick housekeeping items for all of you. Now, if you've attended a session with us in the past, this will be a little repetitive, but we'll try and get through it quick. So one thing we want to stress, as we do with all of our virtual events, is that these chats that we put on in these events are all about you. It's about our community, it's about our attendees, and making sure that you all get the most out of today's event and that you all have a chance to participate. So if you want to make this as interactive and personal an experience as possible, please feel free to. You can participate in a couple different ways. You can come off mute to ask a question or comment. You can also do so in the Zoom chat, or you can DM me if you have anything that you'd like to raise but be kept anonymous. One thing to know though is if you do come off mute for whatever reason, if your camera is on, you will show up on the live recording. If your camera is off, your display name or your avatar picture, whatever you have, that is what will show up on the live recording. So if you have any kind of privacy concerns or anything, just make sure you don't come off mute and you'll be fine. If you, like I said, you can still participate in the group chat, or if you would like to DM me, let's say you're in like super black ops, deep cover, no one can know you're here. That's cool. Just DM me and I will raise your questions or comments and keep you anonymous. Like I said, today's session is being recorded. So we are currently live streaming to our YouTube channel, I believe, as well as our website. And everybody that registered for this event will get a link in an email in about 1 to 2 business days, and that'll take you back to our website where you can rewatch the recording of today's session. So you don't have to feel like you need to take notes. If you miss what somebody said, it's not a problem. Now, if Aubrey says something today that is just mind-blowing for you, like it's a lightning moment and you're just like, I have to tell somebody, I have to share this with a coworker, I have to share it with my cousin, I have to tell my bestie. No problems. You don't have to wait 1 to 2 days. You can always head over to our YouTube channel. Like I said, we're live streaming there. And the recording will be posted there, usually within about 5 to 15 minutes of the end of today's session. I'll share the link to take you to our YouTube channel in just a moment. I highly recommend that you follow us there. You subscribe to that YouTube channel. It is a great way to make sure that you don't have any kind of issues, or you don't forget to register for a chat. So that's a really great thing to do. Now, the other thing I want to highlight is that we are doing live closed captioning. It's available in English and Spanish. There's a link. It's not clickable, but you can take a look at the link that's on the page in front of you. And as we get going, I just want to highlight that, if y'all have questions, we would love to hear them. If we are going over one of your questions that you submitted, and maybe we're not taking it at quite the right angle or something, please feel free to let us know. Give us more context. If something Aubrey says makes you want to dig in deeper on that subject or on that question, just let us know. We want to make sure that you all, get as much out of today as possible. We want to make sure that the time that you spend with Power to Fly, as well as Facebook, is well worth it. So before we introduce you to our amazing speaker, I just want to highlight real quick that Facebook is hiring. So we've got, I'm going to share a link in the chat here to their company page. That's what you see in front of you. This is their company page on powertofly.com. Now, you can check out a number of things here. You can, learn more about the company. You can check out the Insights library is a bunch of their past events that they've partnered on with us, as well as registration pages for upcoming events that they'll be participating in, as well as their open jobs. Now, I'm looking at the page right now, and actually it looks like we've got more jobs currently. Facebook currently has 3,402 roles posted with us. So down at the bottom of the page there, if you click open jobs, you'll be able to search through, filters, all that kind of stuff. If you are actively job seeking and interested in Facebook, I highly recommend that you click, it'll be a big pink button that says follow. It's going to be the top right of the page here. I definitely recommend you do that. Basically what it does is it acts like your friend at the company. All right. It tells Facebook that you're interested in working with them even before you fill out an application, but it also keeps you updated when Facebook posts new roles. So it's a really great way to make sure that, even if you don't see anything that maybe would suit you right now, you don't miss out on the next great role that they post. It's also going to make sure that as much as you want Facebook to stay on your radar, that you stay on theirs as well. So now I get to the good part. I'm really excited to introduce you to Aubrey, who is part of the Facebook team. And thank you so much to Facebook for lending you to us for the afternoon. So Aubrey is currently the director of engineering at Facebook. She joined 3+ years ago and helps to scale the commerce ecosystem, bringing Facebook's FRL hardware to the world. Over the last 20 years, her career has spanned internal roles, startups, and consulting, all with a central theme in and around global commerce. These experiences help establishing and scaling both product and engineering strategies have enabled her to support FRL's rapid growth. We do have a question from the chat, actually. Tara is asking what FRL means. So Aubrey, would you like to elaborate on that for us?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Aubrey. So for anyone who doesn't know, FRL is our Facebook Reality Labs division. That is where we are creating AR or augmented reality and VR, virtual reality hardware. So if you've seen any of our advertisements for our portal devices for video conferencing or at-home video use, that's the AR devices, and things like our Oculus Quest units for commercial VR use. It's those things. It's as Mark talks about it now, the future, one of the futures of the company through the metaverse and through the hardware devices that we're creating. Okay.
Sorry, I made my participant window real big instead of hitting my unmute button. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. Now, I know before we go on into our principal themes and we jump into questions, is there anything else you want to add to this bio or to tell our attendees about yourself or about today's session before we jump in?
No, I mean, thank you for the intro. I really appreciate that. Hi to everyone that's on. I'm really excited to get a chance to speak to everyone. I'll be able to share what I can. This is my view and my sense of how I see leadership and how I see these cross-functional partnerships, but it's just one lens. I bring a lot of my own experiences through consulting and through a lot of different roles in both corporate and startups. So, this is my take on all of this. There may be things that you hear and think, yep, totally get it. Others like, don't know. But really just looking at saying, here, I'll share what I think and see how it lands. So thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for calling that out for us. If you agree with what Aubrey's saying, let us know. If you have a different opinion, let us know. That actually kind of leads us really well into our next slide. So what you see in front of you is some of the principal themes of today's conversation. Now, we identified these both based on conversations with Aubrey prior to today's session, as well as the questions that y'all submitted upon registration. So we're going to try and cover these questions, these subjects, but we want to make sure that y'all understand we want you to drive today's conversation. If, like I said earlier, if you have a question that you'd like to dig in deeper on, let us know. If you asked a question or submitted a question and you're not sure if we're going to get to it, resend it, send it in the Zoom chat, DM it to me, whatever you would like to do. If you do want to come off mute to ask a question to Aubrey or add a comment or something, that is totally encouraged. Just know that we would appreciate it if you stay on mute until you are actively speaking. It helps maintain audio clarity on the call for everyone. And that you try your best not to interrupt Aubrey or one of the other attendees. I get paid to fill the silence, so please do not let me jabbering on be a barrier to you getting your questions answered here today. So like I said, we're going to try and talk a little bit about developing and empowering talent, especially as it concerns remote teams. We're going to talk about some tips for building, scaling, and leading engaged teams, which I think we all understand there are three very different skills. We're going to talk some about the importance of developing meaningful relationships and partnerships for growth, both within your teams as well as obviously cross-functionally. And as a little bit about managing diverse teams and perspectives, especially with inclusion in mind, which might not be, top of everyone's priority list, but obviously it should. All right, so let's jump into some of our kind of most asked questions here. Let's see, speaker, there we go. So Aubrey, one of the questions that we got asked a lot was about cross-functional engagement with global and remote teams.
Mhm.
So how do you set about kind of starting this cross-functional engagement, between different teams or even just different people around the globe?
I think there's it varies based on the size of the teams, where they're at in their evolution, the maturity of not just your team remotely, but maybe the organization, the division that's there. There's so many factors in that, but I'll speak in generalities and then hit on a few specifics as I've seen them. I think maybe more than anything, it's understanding that when people are at distance, it does get a little bit uncomfortably easy to look at relationships as more as just transactional. We do a video conference, I give you work, you deliver work, and needing to remember in all cases, and we've seen this now emerge with even local people being remote, that the person on the other side is still having to work through whatever they are, the challenges, the work from home situations, and what it means to deal with, whether you're by yourself 24 hours a day, or you have family and you have kids walking into the video conference that you're having with leadership, or whatever it might be. There are so many scenarios that now pop up that taking a step back and realizing that it's not transactional, that what we do is still personal. It would be no different than having that conversation in the office and having those pieces. That obviously has been something that we've been trying to do for a very long time with remote teams. It's become very obvious though now as we've all become remote, but those remote teams I think have been asking for a lot of this. And I think it's time to take notice of a lot of that. And so as I mentioned, if you have mature remote teams who are there, how do you create the right structure for that? How do you make sure that you are showing up in their time, that you are showing up in the way in which they need to? There's an element here that is about providing to the people what they need, even if they're not asking for it, understanding, ask the questions, and make sure that you as a leader or someone who has a strong voice in the organization can really bring a sense of deep understanding to people, that they matter, that they're more than just the other end of that transaction. So I think that's how I would view that. There's obviously, I think, a lot of nuance in that, and we can go in a direction if you'd like. But in general, I think it's about the people.
Thank you so much for kind of, I've never heard it phrased quite like that, with the idea of it, this being a personal interaction versus a transactional interaction. I think that's a really good way to think about it, because if you are leaning more towards transactional, sometimes that relationship works, or it's necessary for the particular task. But if you're not ever going into the personal, then I think you're right. It's one of those things that you have to put a little bit more thought into it on the front end than you might if you were all sitting in the same room. But it's not completely unfeasible. So I love that.
Yep.
I
think what's interesting, one last thing on that. I think what's interesting is so much of what particularly when we had teams together, and as things have gone global, this has gotten harder, but I think we've all now experienced it. The importance of those subtle conversations, those hallway conversations, those things that bring people together outside of just the moment of this meeting is covering this topic that drives this result. Taking the time, creating the time, even if it means the intent of the meeting, that conversation on the deliverable or the roadmap or the long range planning that you're doing, that maybe gets shortened by 10 minutes to spend some important time to, how are you? How was your weekend? How was the family? We can't have those hallway conversations anymore, or maybe we couldn't even with the remote teams. Carving out the time and making that important in those conversations, it matters. It matters to the people, and it matters to the relationships, because so much of what we do with the rest of today's conversation, how do we have these great cross-functional relationships? It's built on, how do I trust someone? What do I know about them? And how do I understand how they're motivated, how they're driven? And so it's good to know people.
Yeah. I mean, Caroline's chiming in the chat, totally agrees with you. Caroline said that is so spot on and key to building relationships. Connecting on that individual level is important. I think you're right. It's one of those things that's easy to forget, but it can be pivotal. Anna, you have your hand raised. Would you like to come off mute and ask a question?
Yes, thank you. So since you're working at Facebook and one of your values is to move fast, how do you prioritize speed and establishing trust and building meaningful partnerships?
It's a really, really good question, because I think that's something that we are always trying to optimize on. It obviously varies based on where you are in the work stream, how mature the system space is, the players that are there, meaning how big is the team? Is it a team that's been around a while? But a lot of it is really about it aligns very well with that bottoms up culture that we create as well, right? If you have a centralized model where leadership has to set direction, has to set every goal, has to drive those things, and then you expect people to be successful by moving fast, but they're waiting for something, and unless they have that, they can't move, you're not going to be successful. In order for Facebook to move fast, we also have to decentralize that and say, look, this is about how the team can be successful. What can you do? You're empowered. You have the ability to make decisions. We'll move fast. We will make a decision. We'll pivot quickly if we have to. But those two things have to be aligned. Is getting to the point where the people who need to do things can move fast because they're empowered to move fast. Those two things have to be aligned.
So you kind of cut down on like asking for permission to go ahead. You cut down on that in order to have time for building trust.
As much as we can, right? And that's why that trust is so key, right? We provide that trust, and we want people to lean into it. We love our sayings at Facebook, right? And leaning into that. There's one that's very common. You'll see it on the walls everywhere. Is no problem is somebody else's. That just because something is there and it's a gate for you doesn't mean, well, they need to fix it. No, like this, you're empowered. Go and do these things. Moving fast and doing this across teams, that has to be there for it to work.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great question, Anna. Thank you so much. All right, so let's talk a little bit about how this cross-functional collaboration works logistically. What technologies do you use to really enable this cross-functionality between teams?
So as we've gotten into this global cross-functional view, at least at a remote level, I think it is trying to figure out what is the right thing. We've evolved as a company over the last 16, 18 months within this new model. It has driven a lot of changes, I think, that we've seen, and we're doing it here. How do we use video conferencing? How do we create something that is meaningful when we are spending, particularly if you're in a very visible role or a role that has a lot of interactions across teams, maybe a project or program manager, maybe a eng manager, product manager, whomever it might be that has a ton of these interactions. How do you avoid that burnout that comes from those video calls that are chained one after another, after another, after another? Trying to find ways to minimize that allows folks to get what they need, but to try to actually just be off of calls. It's funny, it's that counterintuitive model, which is to stay more aligned, we actually need to maybe not do as many calls. Shorten things to, do you need 30 minutes for a call? Can you get things done in 10 minutes? Do you need to have 4 calls to stay aligned? Do you need to be able to do more with less? And we're trying to figure that out, because there is no good model. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I think it is similar to the question and the answer with Anna just now. It is also about that decentralization. In order to make things work more globally, and to work cross-functionally, give the teams the authority to do what needs to be done, to move as fast as possible. Yes, we'll need to stay aligned, but by staying aligned when we need to, as opposed to requiring it on a cadence that maybe doesn't make sense in this new work model, is something that we need to do with the individuals. And I think that ultimately, building that that muscle that allows folks to feel comfortable with it and to know that art and science between what is too much, where is too little, we're still trying to figure that out. I think for us, because of the division that we're in is interesting because we also have things like VR. Can we use VR to increase our ability to connect, to use the Oculus units to do these meetings where we're virtually together and staying plugged in to a lot of the functionality that technology allows? And I saw some comments about using Slack rooms and whatnot as well. That within Facebook, we have our internal workplace systems and our ability to stay connected, even though it's a little bit looser than these video conferences. Being able to really work together collaboratively in rooms and still create some sense of community, even if it's a virtual one at this point.
I love that. Now, just from a personal perspective, do you, because you might be working with, a remote team that might not all be in the same place. You might have a remote team that's only distributed within the US, or you might have a remote team that spans the globe. In cases where you have people in such wild different situations or different countries, do you still find it useful to try and tie everyone into a particular method of communication or a particular process for making these changes? Or is it much more, kind of individual to the team?
I think there is commonalities that we want to try to encourage. But there is no question. I have teams in the US, in Europe, and in Singapore, in Asia. Every group has an operational cadence that works. There are things about the location, about the team, about the type of work that they're doing that is going to vary. Creating the ability for that team to find what is workable, what is usable, is far more optimal than enforcing something that says that our standard must be X, and doing that from, again, a position of authority on high as opposed to this bottoms up side. Get out of the way of the teams who are doing the meaningful and actual work, and give them a framework so that they're not wandering in the wilderness lost. We never want that situation, but create this and empower that so that they have the ideas, they can drive it, and they can do so much good with that ability to create what is useful for them. Yep. Okay.
Now, we did have a question in the chat earlier that I want to make sure we touch on so I don't lose it. Navjo had asked, how do you handle and maintain teams with a healthy and balanced dynamic when you might have teammates leaving the company as well as new people joining the teams? Mm-hmm. I think this is a great question because I feel like this is much more the situation for a lot of people than here's my one established team and my second established team and everything there is in stasis and all I have to worry about is getting them to mesh together as they exist right now. What kind of things do you need to either take into consideration, or what do you need to do to try and maintain that balance through these changes?
This is one of those that comes from my lens, which is a Facebook view on this. Inherent to, I think, Facebook culture is an idea that the open transfer of people across teams is something that we support, we encourage. We want to make sure that people are in the position and in a role and in a team where they are inspired to do their best work, where that can hit on the right motivators that drive them. And within Facebook, this notion that the teams are shifting and changing is something that is well ingrained within our culture. And so I think we have created a structure that even before this current model of, I think it's the great job change that we're looking at now, as people are looking post-pandemic, what it means. Do I want this role? Do I not? I think people are we're seeing this now, shifting jobs and switching roles and going different places. I think we've created within Facebook a structure that says, all right, we want the people to show up and be empowered for the role. And so as it means people coming in and people leaving, creating a model that is about, again, I'll keep coming back to this same theme, that the team is empowered, that there is no individual whose loss or departures is going to collapse that team, because everyone on the team is critical. That what everyone comes together and provides is one element to that current version of the team, and that someone's loss is going to be felt, and it's going to be something that we have to adapt and change to. But we also know that the change is going to drive, maybe it drives a value, maybe it changes something in what we need to do. Maybe it means we have an opportunity to make this change, or someone can step up. Leaning into it, and rather than looking at it as an oh shit moment, pardon my language, but like this moment where, okay, how do we deal with this? It's actually, okay, we have a plan for it. We actually culturally want this to happen, and we're ready to do this because it changes meaningful and beneficial. And I think that's how we tend to look at it. I know not every company is structured that way, and some of these changes are going to be more difficult as people come in or people leave. But making sure that, again, that they're set up, that you've been fully transparent with them about what is, what was, what will be, and how to make sure that the people who are leaving on a positive side, that they understand that their value was really appreciated, that there's likely always an open door, and those things that really drive the people side, right? Not that transactional side, that people side of what we do.
That's so great. Thank you for touching on that. Okay, we had a couple of people that are asking questions in the thread, and lovely enough, they really play well into a lot of the stuff that we were already planning to talk about. So thank you for these questions, y'all. Please keep them coming. Karen had asked about suggestions for getting folks back in a team trust and team motivated mindset if they are pandemic exhausted. Obviously, there's a lot of kind of things that play into this. Pandemic exhaustion might look different for every person. It might even come from a different place, homeschooling a bunch of kids versus being shut up in your house versus not being able to see, there's a bunch of different ways people are experiencing it. But how do you try and remotivate that team, or kind of reestablish that trust when everybody's just so exhausted that kind of everything seems a little out of whack?
I think that is maybe one of the most pressing questions that probably every company and everyone in a position where they're working with and maybe supporting other folks is questioning right now, because we've not had to come out of a situation like this for this long with this type of depth of challenge in the modern work world, going back to what, maybe 1917, 1918 is the last time that societies had to deal with this. I don't know that we have all of the questions. I do know what we're seeing, I think, for the most part, and I'll give some generalities here. I think in terms of how leadership can show up and create this model for how we repair is, first and foremost, you be there for the people in the team, and make sure that above all things, that before you can start to repair things, to heal things, to put things maybe back in proper alignment, there actually needs to be that time. If someone needs the time to step aside, that someone needs the space, that someone needs an adjusted time schedule, they need to shift their hours, they need to make a living change, like location or otherwise, that they are going to be set up for success by doing those things before all of the other actions come in place. I know from a Facebook standpoint, we've leaned into wanting and actively looking to move more and more into some type of split remote work model, something that at a company level we would have never really considered a number of years ago is now something core to what we do, because it means that it provides that thing to people who need it, that it might be, if you live by yourself and you want to move where family is, or you're disconnected from your parents and you need to provide support, or You just need you need that change because of what's happened over this last year and being shut up in the same house every day for 18 months. This is something where we have to show up where our teams are and where the individuals are and get them what they need. And only after that can we really help. And that is things like doing a far better job with the focus on work-life balance. My division, we've recently moved to saying, in the Bay Area, we have 5 Facebook locations where we can work from, and we've always worked out of the same location. We want the team co-located. We recently said, no, this is now about how you, the employee, need what you need. Pick the location you want to work at, go where you want. And this is a really interesting model, because now it says, look, we're not going to tell you where to work. You're going to tell us what works for you. It's so much of that is key.
You're right. It's one of those things that you kind of have to look at it holistically. You can't just look at one side of the issue. Mm-hmm. We did have a question that I really found interesting. This person had asked, have you ever needed to reset a cross-functional relationship that had turned negative? What did you do and what was the outcome? And I find this fascinating because for me, success is great, but you learn more from failure or from problems on the way to success. So have you had any personal experience with this?
Oh, sure. I think anyone in leadership who says, no, that really haven't had that, I think either hasn't had a lot of those experiences or maybe is trying to minimize things. There is no question that the challenges that come from the cross-functional relationships are some of the more difficult things you have to solve. And the hard thing about hard things is they're hard. But to your point, they are some of the things that actually make, on the other side, the teams and the relationships stronger than they've ever been. And I think when I've had, and I can think of a couple, and I'll maybe talk more in the general terms because there's a few different lessons in those. I think for the most part, for relationships to go sideways, it usually is the result of multiple things that over time have accumulated in some way that has driven things sideways or south. That it's usually not one thing you can recover from. Even one thing repeatedly you can manage through, and you can even set a process around. But when there's that erosion of trust, and that trust goes away because of varying levels of things, that's where repair needs to come in. And usually that trust loss comes in as a result of loss of that communication that sets so many of the underlying core tenets of those relationships. What are the teams not communicating? Do they disagree on direction? Do they disagree on the roadmap? Are they orthogonal in terms of like goal and action? Those are the pieces that they start slowly, they snowball. Stepping back from that and realizing, again, I mentioned the hard thing about hard things is they are hard, but actually having that conversation and saying, look, before this gets any further, let's recognize one, where we're at. It's not healthy. It's not good. It's not in a good place. But we're all on the same side of the table, looking at the problem on the other side. Because as long as we're doing that, then we can solve it. When we're on opposite sides of the table and we're looking at each other as the problem, you're not going to solve things. Stepping back, you're on the same side of the table. You're looking at that and you can agree. Yeah, some of these things are going to be difficult. I'm going to have to change. You're going to have to change. But you have to do that by looking at that problem together. So I think it's that, right? You're going to get to those situations those situations and problems through a series of actions. The way out, you need to lean into that relationship. You've got to own what is wrong, and you need to be willing to put aside pride and even need and say, but this is what has to happen. Hopefully that gets to the core of it, but if there's more we want to dig into, they're happy to go deeper.
Okay. We do have Caroline with her hand raised. We're going to get to you just a second.
Sure.
One question that I did want to kind of tie into this before we jump from this idea of communication. When we talked a little bit about how that communication can be repaired, let's talk a little bit about how it should be happening from jump. Are there any keys or any like things to try and strive for or look for that would really help that communication between cross-functional teams, especially when there's shared expectations? The idea of how those expectations and how those deliverables and how those specifics are communicated to each team could be entirely different. So do you have any tips for maintaining that communication, or how that communication should look?
Sure. Great question. So a few things that jump to mind first off, and this is generally how I'll approach not just cross-functional relationships, but I think strategy, as I think about tactically, how do we solve situations, is starting with the question of, in this situation, as it stands now, let's say it's healthy and we want to continue just moving it forward in a great way. What am I not doing? Rather than looking at this from a, what do they need to do? What does the team need to do? What am I not doing? I'm going to center this on me. How do I, whatever actions I can take, what can I do? What can I own? No, like mentioned earlier, no problem is somebody else's. There are things that I can actively do. Let me own that, because I can drive that. Beyond that, looking at, I'm not going to assume anything. So much of things in cross-functional relationships, whether it's across from an engineering team to a product team or product design, or even across the company from engineering orgs and business orgs, when we get into assumptions versus reality, that is when things can really start to sort of fester under the surface and create situations that aren't real, that then have to be unwound. So always starting with the idea of not assuming that the team is healthy or the project's in the right direction, making sure that I'm asking the questions, that I'm asking to listen, that I'm asking to hear what's being said, and then making sure that when I am communicating, that I'm really, really clear. Yes, it's not always comfortable to share the more difficult thing. It's not always easy to talk about whether someone's underperforming or a team is under delivering, but being present and being clear without being punitive is incredibly clear. Facebook has created this wonderful culture where we don't look at change or even problems as punitive, right? When we have a SEV, the website goes down, we don't look and say, whose fault was it? And, how do we, it's actually, what did we learn? What was our learning and how do we do better? And so creating the structure where, what can I do? How do I start without those assumptions and start with reality? And how do we create a model that actually encourages, I think, people to want to be involved in this? I think are great ways from jump to go so you can avoid some of those problems.
I love what you said about that communication being open, continuous, and not punitive. I think that's a huge thing there. You talked earlier about empowering teams to make decisions and empowering individuals to make decisions, and knowing not necessarily, there are mistakes can be made, but knowing that you are supported in that and that there's something to be learned. And if there's a problem, then, it's tackled, not only just like you screwed up, you have to fix this, but you have everybody around in a team sense of, okay, how do we fix this situation the way it is? Being able to make those choices and not have fear, not necessarily repercussions, but not have fear of like being called out and, bad dog, is very important for both, kind of the freedom for teams to take chances and try new things, but also for that development of, I love that.
Yeah. One thing to add to that.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I'll add one thing to that. I'll give you this really good example, because as we're talking about cross-functional relationships, one of mine is with the FRL team, right? I'm responsible for these systems for them. This non-punitive model, but this learning model allows us between teams. The engineers that are within the org, they can discover problems that the system is broken in some way. It hasn't shown up on a dashboard. No users reporting it. But because of this model, they will self-file this severity report saying we had this issue. It needs to be addressed. I fixed it. And then when we do our sever reviews, the business is included. So we're in some ways telling on ourselves. And I think in a model that it would be punitive, we would want to push the business away. We'd want to make sure that we were hiding those things. We do the opposite. And in doing so, these relationships build stronger and stronger on trust. They trust that we're doing the right things because we're telling them what we're doing. We aren't hiding anything. Yes, we have to have accountability. And yes, we have to have the responsibility for those systems. But by sharing and being there and saying, here's what we learned, here's what won't happen again, and here's how we're going to move forward. It creates this reinforcing model for those cross-functional relationships.
That's great. Caroline, I want to thank you for your patience. I'm so sorry you've had your hand up for a while. Would you like to come off mute and ask your question?
I do, though I've lost some of what I wanted to say because it was
I'm so sorry.
and it was more relevant to what we were talking about 5 minutes ago, but I'll make the point anyway. I think so much of what you're describing really is cultural within the organization. I think what you were saying before made me think of, particularly tech companies tend to be notoriously competitive. And there's this atmosphere where people are afraid to ask for help, especially when they're struggling, because they don't want to appear as weak. But then what happens is it goes into the communication piece. So I'm struggling with this project. It looks like I'm not going to be able to deliver on time. I need help, but I'm afraid to ask for help because I don't want to be seen as weak. So I continue to struggle. Deadlines get missed, and now I'm in trouble, right? So it really needs to come from ingrained in the culture of the organization that teams need to be supportive of one another, that someone is not weak if they need help or if they need support. And it's all about really having that partnership within the team and building trust, that people feel safe in coming forward and saying, I'm struggling, I need help, whatever it is, whether it's another body or additional training or more time, if that's possible, whatever it is, really having that be part of the culture so that people don't feel like they're in this box, it's just them. And if they're struggling and if they don't deliver on time, that, it's an epic fail on them. And now they have this mark and they've lost trust because they didn't deliver on time. And now people are not confident in giving them another assignment because they had this thing, right? It has this terrible downstream effect. Mm-hmm. So how do we create that situation from happening in the first place?
So it's really interesting because I think tech in general has that reputation, right? That you either succeed, you succeed or you fail. It's one or the other. It's a binary in some ways. And I think maybe historically, maybe in the grand old days of tech in the late 90s or 2000s when things were maybe different, maybe it was. But given I think the way that culture has shifted, that we, not just Facebook, but I think a lot of tech are really looking at it and saying, we benefit from the strength of the people, and these people who are our teams who can build through adversity. Like this how do we learn and strengthen ourselves through these actions is something that is beneficial as opposed to being, like, again, punitive. And I do think in order to avoid the situations, you've got to create those models that reinforce the right pieces. The manager to employee relationship, like how do you that engineering manager to the software engineer relationship, being able to have a conversation that is open, that the manager is able to say, hey, I'm noticing this. Can you share with me? Like, can I get you help? Do you need support here? Do you need this? And creating that psychological trust there for the IC to be able to say, yeah, here's what I need. I'm falling behind because of this. I'm falling behind because I'm struggling with the tech. I'm falling behind because I live by myself and I'm alone 24 hours a day. I'm actually genuinely depressed. Here's what I need. That relationship has to exist, right? The manager, whether it's engineering, product design, analytics, whatever it might be, they can't solve all of those problems. But being able to create something that allows the active flow of information and the ability to trust that I can share this with you, and doing this regularly, the importance of one-on-ones, and that the one-on-ones are not a status check-in, that they are about how are you doing? I can, like, as a leader, I can tell you where I think you're at. As someone on the team, tell me where you think you're at. Tell me what you want to tell me about the team. How are you feeling? It has to be that bi-directional, and it has to be something that's ingrained in there. So I really do think it starts there, because if it gets up to that other level, like where, yeah, the project's gone sideways because someone didn't deliver, we can fix that. But we could have fixed that if we'd had more of those details and had known more things. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about Facebook's employee resource groups and how you can get support kind of from your peers in a similar way that you're describing?
Yes. So the resource groups, yeah, the company as a whole has done a really great job in terms of creating support structures in very deep ways and in very broad ways as well, to be able to encourage whether it's profiles coming together, all of the software engineers having a community to come together and say, what do I do in this situation in a trusting way? How do I get details? How do I talk about the things that are hard? Being able to do it within maybe not your profile community, but something where you identify, whether it's in the Women at group or the Pride group or the Latinx group, whatever it might be. How do you maybe lean in and seek the support and help from trusted friends and like-minded people who can give you advice from their experiences? Culturally speaking, it has to be there in something that is authentic, so that people can show up and feel safe, and that the company is also willing to take the time to create that, to create the space for that, to acknowledge that it's important, that when we do our calibrations, that the work that you do in one of those resource groups is actually something that's beneficial in your rating, that says you took the time to do this. That is as important in a lot of ways as delivering, like it's a measured impact. It's maybe not product impact, but it's people impact, it's company impact, it's team impact. Yeah.
That is so great. Caroline, thank you for those questions. Those were amazing. There's plenty of talk in the chat with people chiming in saying that they love this conversation and love where it's going. One thing that I do want to touch on, because I think Kayla touched a lot, or sorry, Aubrey touched a lot on this communication and kind of being able to, like you said, like not make every one-on-one a status check. We had a question from people wanting to know, oftentimes in a collaborative project or in cross-functionality, the group will default to following the opinions of a few individuals. What can we do to ensure the diverse set of perspectives get heard and considered? Because I mean, I've been guilty of this too. You know, I feel like in a group, there's somebody that maybe knows more than me, and so I tend to defer to them. How have you managed this in the past?
It happens. I'm not saying that there's magic that says do these two things and boom, everything is magically better. I do think it starts at the culture that the leadership creates at the company level, at the org levels, at the team levels. You know, we are a bottoms-up company. We want everyone at every level to be able to have and be empowered to share and say. And that includes these working groups. Yes, there are going to be stronger voices in the room, but I think it's also important for the people in the room to understand and speak up for everyone around them. This isn't that we should speak for other people, but we need to hold the space for everyone to make sure that for the person who tends to drive the conversation, make sure that they understand that there's others in the room. Make sure that you can hold space, particularly as if you're in leadership or have a role that does allow you to somewhat craft the conversation. Make sure that if they're comfortable with it, having the opportunity to speak, invite them to speak, pull in those pieces, right? There are people who are going to be best in listening mode and being able to provide feedback in a different avenue, maybe in an offline conversation, maybe in one-on-one situations. So we want to make sure that we're not basically creating a situation that makes them uncomfortable because they don't want to show up in those ways. This is about the people. Again, it comes back to making sure that we understand what inspires and what drives each person, so we can look at that. But it is on all of us. Hold the space for those people and make sure that there is room for those additional comments. But at the same time, for those people who are highly motivated, highly driven, want a voice, we don't want to create issues for them as well. That's great. That's how they show up. And so finding that pattern that works, it's very unique. It's the DNA of every team. Some work extremely well together. Some there's some questions, but yeah, it's art and science to some extent.
Absolutely. So we have about 9 minutes left in the chat. We want to reserve some time to talk a little bit more about Facebook's company culture and that whole thing. The last question that I want to ask, I'm picking the one that I thought was going to be the most interesting. What was in the past, what made your hardest cross-functional relationship so difficult? And what did you learn from that experience? I always like I said, I'm very interested in the struggle because that's where you learn things. So what would you say, is been your hardest cross-functional relationship?
I think it's a relationship that grew from, I mentioned earlier, too many assumptions, that so much had occurred that there was general views of, once we were able to sit down and finally say, all right, it's necessary. The right way to solve this is to sit down. We're not going to be able to go much further if we don't solve something here. To sit down and say, I'm going to tell you about us. I want you to tell me about you. What are you seeing? How do you see the situation? And I need to listen, and I need to understand where you're coming from. Then I'm going to tell you what I'm seeing. And when we did that, and when we saw that situation and said, I didn't know you saw it like this. I didn't know that that's what you needed. I didn't realize that you didn't know that we had this head count and that means we can do so much work. And you assumed we could do these other things, and you didn't know about these rules that limited us. So much ends up getting built on what we assume because of our past experiences, because of past actions, and even probably past teams. And that weight of that history, if we're not careful, we pull that forward. And every step forward, that anchor digs in deeper and deeper. We have to leave that history behind at some point. And that means, like I said, it's the hard thing to do. But when you do that and you're able to shed that and say, great, we're moving past assumptions and into knowledge and learning and truths, it's so much more beneficial to everyone involved.
I have said it a million times. I will say it a million times more. It doesn't matter how many of these I sit through. There is always a moment where I'm like, how did you think of that? I've never heard it like that. And I got to tell you, the weight of those assumptions, that's a good phrase. I love that. That is, because you're right. There are certain things, I think about it in terms of kind of luggage, there's certain stuff when you go somewhere or go someplace new, you have to bring. It's just something that has to come with you so that you can stay fed, clothed, safe, whatever. But you're right. If you are carrying all of your past assumptions and all of your past experiences into everything, that's going to weigh on you. And there's certain stuff that you don't need to bring to this situation. You can always go back to your supplies and pull it out later if you need it. But there's some things that are going to exhaust you if you keep carrying them around. And I just love that. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Okay, so we only have about 5 minutes left. This time always goes way too quickly, but I want to make sure that we go back and we touch a little bit more on kind of some of Facebook's company culture, as well as your, kind of some of the things that you think about the teams and about the org in general. You talked a lot about empowering people within the scope of this chat that we've had. So I don't really want to dive that much into that empowering culture, but I really want to know about your tips for someone who's interviewing, because there's a lot of people, and I don't think anyone is surprised by this. There's a lot of people in the chat that are interested in a role with Facebook. So let's dig in a little bit on your tips for someone who's interviewing.
Yeah, I put one here, and I think it's probably the one I would give anyone, regardless of what role that they're thinking about. When you're interviewing, more than anything, talk out what you're thinking. Right? The goal is to understand not just the information you know, but how you think through the process. Right? You can give, and I guess in an extreme example, you could potentially give the wrong example, but your thinking can help highlight. Oh no, your thinking is accurate. Maybe you came up with the wrong result. Maybe from an engineering standpoint, maybe the algorithm is slightly wrong, but your approach, you're thinking through that, the depth of which you go, how you think about the breadth and the depth helps us understand not just what's written or what's said, but also how you're thinking about that. And that is so important, right? Because that allows us to know you a bit more. It allows us to know those experiences that you're bringing to this. How are you looking at trade-offs? How are you considering adjustments? That is really, really important. So I'd say that's probably the most important, regardless of what role. Talk to us. Talk to us about what you're thinking. And it's a little uncomfortable because most of us want to stop and think and then answer, but it is really meaningful to do.
I really like that, because you're right. You know, the answer is, you ask somebody the same question, you ask 10 people the same question, 5, 6, 7, however many might tell you the same answer in response. But if you talk through it, I feel like you're right. You would find very different methods of arriving at that same answer. And it's not to say that any of them are better than any else, but some might be more suited to a particular team or a particular project. Mm-hmm. Some might be more complementary to a team that's already existing. So here, we'll fit you in on this. Mm-hmm. I love that. Thank you for diving in on that. And Caroline is also in the chat here talking about that's the value of diversity of thought. It truly is. If you have questions or problems or pain points that you're trying to solve, and the existing team hasn't been able to solve them, not to say you need a new team, but where's your culture gap? Where are where are the people in the room that could maybe look at this completely differently than somebody else who's already tried to tackle that issue? I absolutely love that. Okay, so we want to talk a little bit about some of the open roles at Facebook. People have been asking a ton of questions about this. So if you want to take a screenshot of this, you can. I'm also going to be sharing all of the links in the chat. So just give me a second to get those pulled in here. Would you, or Ashley or Noma, somebody that's on the call, would you like to speak to any of these, kind of highlighted roles? Or is it more, do you want to speak more to, in general about, what's going on hiring wise at Facebook?
I mean, I can speak in generals, and Nilma can speak just a bit as well, right? We are at a moment in time where with Facebook, where we are trying to, like, as always, probably we are trying to do so many things. And so I think this list of roles here are key and critical ones, but it's by no means exhaustive. And I would encourage anyone to go and look at the inclusive list that's here. We really do need that diversity of thought and diversity of background. And we want people that can bring something to the team that maybe we don't even know ourselves. And I can't see all of the questions as I'm speaking here, but I know there's some questions about roles at Facebook and different things. I would encourage folks to, explore at least the conversation, right? Even if there's questions, what does it mean? My background, I'll be genuinely transparent with folks. My background maybe isn't the exact one that you would expect for someone at a direct level at Facebook. Sure, I had questions when I looked at the role 3 years ago, but I think the company really does it leans into that, wanting to increase the type of backgrounds, the type of experiences, the type of knowledge. And it's worth that conversation because even if it's not now, it might be something that's there in the future. Make that connection, have the conversation, and see what's possible.
I seriously have loved basically everything that everyone has been saying on this chat. So I just want to say huge thank you to everyone. We have come to the end of our event, but huge thank you to you, Aubrey. It's never just what you see in front of you. There's a lot of behind the scenes and prep work that goes on, and we are so grateful that you were able to spend time with us today and share your experience and share your expertise in this area. Just thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you to our huge, amazing audience. We were so happy to see so many new faces as well as returning faces join us today. Please be sure to take a look at the cross-team event survey that I have shared in the chat. You can also take a screenshot of this slide and go fill it out if you'd like. It only takes 2 minutes max to fill it out. Real people actually read them, and that is how we make improvements to events like this. So I'm usually one of the people that reads them. So like, swear it doesn't go into a box somewhere and, you know, gather electronic dust. So please feel free to let us know what you liked as well as what you didn't like about this session. And thank you so much for your questions and engagement. It makes these events just pop. So thank you to everyone for your participation today. I hope that all of you have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday. If you don't join us for another event this week, have a great weekend. But until we see you again on an upcoming chat, vaya con Dios, guys. See you later. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.